Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour. The last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, died last night following a long illness. He was aged 91. Acclaimed for bringing the Cold War to a peaceful end, he's been hailed as a figure who changed the course of history. We'll be getting reaction throughout the hour to his death. Believe it or not, the race to be the next Conservative Party leader is all but over. The final hustings are tonight in London ahead of an announcement on Monday. We'll be getting the latest from our political correspondent, Tom Holwood. Eurozone inflation has hit another record of 9.1% as food and energy prices soar across the continent, beating economists' expectations. What does it mean, though, for the euro and indeed for Europe's economy as we head into the winter? And Shamima Begum, who flew from the UK and joined Islamic State, was allegedly smuggled into Syria by an intelligence agent from Canada. We'll be finding out more about this with a national security expert. And as always, do get in touch with your views, GBViews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at GBNews. All that and so much more between now and 4. But first, at the top of the hour, the news headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. In a break from royal tradition, the Queen will not return to London to meet with the newly elected Prime Minister and Boris Johnson next week. Instead, Mr Johnson will travel to Balmoral in Aberdeenshire for their final meeting with him in post. Of course, we don't know yet who the next Prime Minister to meet the Queen will be. This week is the final few days of campaigning between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Tonight, they go head-to-head in the final hustings. Boris Johnson's warning the Kremlin is intent on undoing the good of Mikhail Gorbachev as he paid tribute to the former Soviet leader. US President Joe Biden is among a number of world leaders who've praised Mr Gorbachev's legacy following his death at the age of 91. He's widely recognised for his role in bringing an end to the Cold War. Today, Mr Johnson accused Vladimir Putin of attempting to recreate the Soviet Union.
Mikhail Gorbachev is one of those people who triggered a series of changes that perhaps he didn't anticipate. Maybe he paid his own political price for it. But when history is written, he will be, I think, one of the authors of fantastic change for the better in the world. And what I worry about today is that the current leadership in Moscow is intent on undoing the good that Mikhail Gorbachev did.
New figures show food is rising at its fastest rate since the financial crisis in 2008. The British Retail Consortium say the annual increase in fresh food prices jumped to 10.5%, up from 8% in July. And it's products like milk and margarine that are going up the highest. They say the war in Ukraine is continuing to put pressure on food prices. Royal Mail workers are striking again today in an ongoing dispute over pay, with further industrial action planned. The Communication Workers Union says more than 100,000 members are involved, making it the biggest strike of the summer. The action follows a walkout last week in a protest at a 2% pay rise, although the company says more money's on offer. Further strikes are planned for Thursday the 8th and Friday the 9th of September. Rail companies have announced further strikes for the end of September. The TSSA union says staff at 9 train companies, as well as Network Rail, will walk out from midday on Monday the 26th of September for 24 hours. There have already been several days of industrial action over the summer as thousands of transport staff have walked out over pay and conditions. The government has set out plans to sell £1.5 billion worth of its offices as part of a new property strategy. The aim is to move public sector workers into fewer buildings over the next 3 years. The Brexit minister, Jacob Rees-Mogg, says Whitehall is cutting public costs so money can be returned to the taxpayer. The government also says it's aiming to save £500 million by using different energy sources. A team of inspectors from the UN's nuclear watchdog have arrived at the Russian-occupied town of Zaporizhia. The International Atomic Energy Agency are going to inspect the town's nuclear plant for damage after weeks of shelling nearby raised fears of a radiation accident. The team say they're hoping to stabilise the situation.
With all clarity, my mission is a technical mission. It's a mission that seeks to prevent a nuclear accident and to preserve this important, the largest, the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, in the whole of Europe, not only in Ukraine. So this is what we are concentrating on.
NASA will make a second attempt at launching a rocket to the moon this weekend after the first takeoff was postponed to earlier this week. The Artemis 1 mission flight had been due to launch from Florida's Kennedy Space Center on Monday, but was called off over technical issues. The flight is now set to blast off from Cape Canaveral on Saturday afternoon in a 6-week test flight around the moon and back. But there's a 40% chance of favourable weather, so the operation may yet again be clouded with issues. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now let's head back to the briefing with Darren.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. It is 6 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon. We're on TV, online, and of course on your DAB digital radios as well. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Now, we're going to start with the death of Mikhail Gorbachev because he was the last leader of the Soviet Union and he died last night following a long illness. He was aged 91. Acclaimed for bringing the Cold War to a peaceful end, he'd been hailed as a figure who changed the course of history through his policies of openness with the West and structural reforms within the former USSR. Famously, Margaret Thatcher, of course, said that she was a man whom she could have done business with. And the genuine connection between Gorbachev, Thatcher and Ronald Reagan cannot be overstated in ending the evils of communism within the USSR and the threat of a Third World War between nuclear superpowers. Yet it has been noted that despite the promise Gorbachev laid out of a free democratic Russia, that promise has slipped away, increasingly under the authoritarian rule of Vladimir Putin. While reflecting on the legacy of Gorbachev earlier, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson had to pay tribute to him while also noting where Russia was today under Vladimir Putin.
Mikhail Gorbachev, yes, well, Mikhail Gorbachev is one of those people who changed the world and unquestionably changed it for the better. When you look at what he did to make Europe whole, free, to give freedom to the countries of the former Soviet Union, it was a quite extraordinary thing. And of course, Mikhail Gorbachev is one of those people who triggered a series of changes that perhaps he didn't anticipate. Maybe he paid his own political price for it. But when history is written, he will be, I think, one of the authors of a fantastic change for the better in the world. And what I worry about today is that the current leadership in Moscow is intent on undoing the good that Mikhail Gorbachev did.
There you go, Prime Minister speaking a little bit earlier. Delighted to say I'm joined by Ewan Grant from Strategic Intelligent Analyst who joins me in the studio. Ewan, very good afternoon to you. Just first of all, there's not many people, I suppose, left alive today that could unite President Biden, Boris Johnson and Vladimir Putin, a real sign of Gorbachev's place in history.
Undoubtedly, I mean, and as others have pointed out, including on your programmes, it'll probably be decades before we understand his full position, which is very great anyway, very significant. And the real issue is is Putin an aberration which will last perhaps beyond Putin's lifetime, but not by any means forever? And will we see a quasi-democratic Russia, or are we going to get generations of Putinism?
What was it about Gorbachev, though, that in the 1980s, when Thatcher said that she could do business with him, his changes when it comes to reform and to restructuring the USSR, why did that all come about? Why was that? Why was it him, and why did it happen in the 1980s?
Well, it's cometh the hour, cometh the man, and of course everybody is determined, everybody's character is conditioned by their experiences as young people and indeed their parents. It was the legacy of the war. The war was starting to fade, and of course the war is Russia. The Second World War is Russia. That is the Russian soul, for good or ill. He was, however, of that generation where that was starting to dilute. There wasn't any direct experience as an adult. And he saw, long enough, the decline from the 70s, when they really got a kickstart and a boost for 10 years from the oil crisis, and their revenues went up, but the system wasn't working. So cometh the hour, cometh the man. He was the generation, and Andropov saw that this was the man who might be the man to solve it. In saying that, many people have been remarking today, haven't they, that he also, with the changes in the 1980s, didn't necessarily want to bring down the USSR and create the Russian Federation, but in the end, that's what happens. Yes, and of course, this is the great alibi that Putin uses to justify what he's doing now, and the hardliners, that it was an enforced system, and if you liberate it, it's perhaps going to collapse. That there is a grain of truth. I saw the end of the Soviet Union on board a Soviet warship in Greece in 1983, when I was staggered at the national divide between the Slavic and non-Slavic peoples. I didn't realize this was going to happen, but I saw it then, and yes, it just got out of control, but nobody has a crystal ball. Interesting, though, isn't it, that you talk about where we are at the moment with President Putin being an aberration. Many would say, though, if you look at the history of Russia, actually the aberration was the attempt at democracy in the 1990s under President Yeltsin. Very, very badly handled, it must be said. There is a feeling that Russia is a country, the argument we made, that needs a strong leader, and that's ultimately where it's always going to end up. Yeah, well, where do you draw the line? You can have a strong leader, and we've seen this in the past. I mean, indeed, to an extent, we saw it in China under Mao Zedong. China was very rigid, but it was too weak to expand outside its borders. I think there's an awful lot in that. Where do you draw the line? Strength, but not fear. Putin has gone way over, but you're spot on. The Yeltsin years were very badly handled, and also there's an element of blame from the West. There were too many whiz kids came in and didn't realise from the West how hard this is going to be. Indeed. OK, really fascinating stuff. Ewan, thank you very much indeed. Ewan Grant there joining us in the studio. Let's go to Berlin now and speak to the former Russian reporter for the Daily Telegraph. That's Ben Aris, who joins us down the line. Ben, very good afternoon to you. You've met Mikhail Gorbachev. I suppose, in many ways, just give us a sense of what the man, the person, on the individual basis was like.
Yes, I was a kid watching those rapprochements between the West and the East, Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan, and he came across as this slightly sort of misfit, dumpy, but jolly man. And to meet him in the flesh, he had this enormous charismatic, magnetic personality that overwhelms you. I think many successful politicians have the same. And was absolutely on his ball, sharp as a pin, an incredibly intelligent man. And I guess you have to be someone a bit special if you end up being the supreme leader of one of the world's two superpowers. Although when I met him in 2004, this was already well past his heyday. And he continued to be a figure in Russia, but he didn't really play much of a political role. And his star has somewhat faded as the whole country moved on beyond him. But as I say, at this event, I mean, he was still a rock star to all of the investors and business people who were there came to hear him speak.
And what for you is his kind of, the key moment, the key takeaway, the key kind of place in history? He did in many ways bring about the fall of the USSR, but that had lots of consequences, didn't it? Not least of all for where you are right now in Berlin.
No, indeed. And, I lived in Russia on and off for 30 years, and he has a sort of mixed legacy from the outside, from the Western perspective. He's the man that ended the Cold War, that rapprochement with Ronald Reagan. However, from within amongst the Russians themselves, they have a much more mixed opinion of him, because you have to understand that the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of that superpower status, was deeply humiliating for most Russians. And of course, Gorbachev brought that around. His whole glasnost, perestroika reforms that were designed to get the Soviet Union to catch up, modernize it, make it a contender in the world, and keep it in play. They ran out of control. He lost control of the situation. And that ended up with the Baltics breaking away in '89 and 1990, and the coup attempt in '91, which actually brought him down. And so in many ways, he's seen by the Russians as the instigator of the collapse that followed. And that first decade of so-called democracy, again, it looks nice from the outside, but for the Russians who lived through it, was absolutely miserable time. I mean, pensioners were living on $10 a month and could barely feed themselves. The cradle-to-grave Soviet system that Gorbachev presided over had collapsed completely. And so if you were 20 years old in '91, then you were fine. New companies were coming in, you could get a job. But if you were 40 years old in '91, then your life was wrecked, because your job, your savings disappeared, and your future, you had to rely on your children if you had some. So this was a very difficult time. The legacy for the Russian people themselves was actually very mixed.
What do you think? He didn't comment on it. He was clearly quite ill in the last couple of months. What do you think he would have made of Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
He didn't comment on it publicly, although friends of his said that he disapproved of it. Having said that, he actually supported the annexation of the Crimea when that happened in '91. But it's suggested by his friends who've commented on this that he thought it was a bad idea, because he could see that the catastrophe that this has been for Russia, the permanent break, as far as I'm concerned now, with the West, and the sanctions that will never be lifted in our lifetime, which will denigrate the Russian economy. It won't be able to grow, and it's doomed to now decades of stagnation. And Gorbachev is enough of a politician, I think, to see all of this, and a pragmatist too. I mean, to find, he was the one who reached out to the West in the Cold War to try and find a relationship. And Putin has done the opposite. He's definitively broken off relationships with the West in such a way that they can't be repaired now. The animosity between the Ukrainians and Russians, who always saw themselves as brothers or cousins, is now permanent, and that can't be undone. So I don't know, it's a tragic situation, and I think Gorbachev was enough of a leading politician to be able to see all of that.
And just very finally, Ben, what we've got, you talking about the consequences of that war in Ukraine. Today, Russia seems to almost effectively be turning off the gas taps to Germany. But in saying that, there are suggestions that actually Germany has managed to use the summer in many ways to fill up its reserves.
Yes, indeed. The gas tanks yesterday met the EU deadline set at the start of the year to be 80% full, and the deadline was for October the 1st, and so they've been filled to 80% a month ahead of time. And it looks like we're going to go into the winter with the gas tanks, they're already at absolute normal levels. And the Gazprom turned off the Nord Stream 2 pipeline today for 3 days for so-called maintenance. However, that's relatively insignificant. The amount of gas that doesn't come through is not going to make much difference. This is a gesture by Putin, and what he's threatening to do is turn the gas off completely in the winter, because despite the fact that the tanks are full, Germany's tanks in particular only last 2 months. So if there's no more gas coming through, and he turned off the gas in December, then by the end of February, we'd run out of energy here in Berlin. And that would start a huge energy crisis. And I think subsidiary to that, the idea of threatening to do it by making these gestures with the 3-day stoppage is designed specifically to drive the prices up. And the prices are now 20 times normal. And in the UK, you're seeing that there with this super high inflation. And it's now at 30-year high levels. And the point there is he's trying to punish, it's his weapon to hit back, punish the West by making you pay through the nose for energy and spend a lot of money. I mean, the EU has already spent over $200 billion because of this crisis, above and beyond normal. And Putin's going to continue to play this game. So I don't think this is the last stoppage we're going to see.
Indeed. Ben, as always, appreciate your time live from Berlin this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed, Ben. Emrys there joining us from the German capital. OK, we'll take a quick break here on GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to be looking at the Conservative leadership race. We are into the final couple of days. It is the final hustings tonight, the race for number 10. Live reaction to that and much more in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's go over to the Met Office for the weather on this Wednesday afternoon.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Another dry and bright day for most tomorrow with sunny spells and probably feeling, certainly by the afternoon, a little bit warmer than it does out there today. High pressure is controlling our weather currently. There are low pressure systems lurking. We are going to see a change by the weekend. But for most of us, as I said, that high pressure will continue to dominate. It's bringing a breeze in from the North Sea. It's a bit chilly on some of these North Sea coasts, and also just one or two showers drifting in on that breeze across parts of eastern England. But they're few and far between. Most places dry, staying with clear spells overnight as well. It will be a cool night once more, certainly across Scotland. Temperatures in rural areas well down into single figures. A little warmer than last night in the south. Some towns and cities staying in the teens. On to Thursday, and again, a dry and a bright day for most. A bit more cloud over northeast England especially. One or two showers are possible close by to Newcastle and Durham, but say most will stay dry. Late in the day, just the threat of some showers coming up across southernmost parts of England too. The sunshine will turn quite hazy here, but it will be a warm day, 24, 25, and a touch warmer with the sunny spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland too. More of a change as we go through tomorrow evening. More showers drifting up from France and over the Channel to southern parts of England, across the Midlands and into parts of Wales, and they'll continue to drift in during Friday. Somewhat hit and miss, so if you're after rain, this is no guarantee at this stage that you will see some, but increasing chance of seeing showers on Friday here, but also for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, we'll start to see a weather front moving in, bringing more cloud and some showers possibly too. Temperature-wise, well, again, high teens mostly across the far north. We're looking at 21 to 25 elsewhere. These two weather systems then are merging together to form one area of low pressure that gets rid of the high and brings all of us some showery rain this weekend.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Very good afternoon and welcome back to the briefing. Now, the final Conservative Party leadership hustings is taking place this evening with growing pressure on the successful candidate to urgently introduce measures to tackle, of course, the cost of living crisis. Let's bring in Tom Harwood, our political correspondent. I'm going to go to this a little later on tonight. Very excited I am to find out what they've got to say. I'm sure it'll be remarkably different from what they've said over the last 8 weeks. In saying that, one significant piece of news today we did get is that, breaking with tradition somewhat, the new Prime Minister, and indeed the outgoing Prime Minister, will go to Balmoral and not Buckingham Palace to see the Queen.
Yes, ever since Queen Victoria ascended to the throne in 1837, every single Prime Minister has become Prime Minister by visiting Buckingham Palace, except for one in 1908.
Where did he go to?
Asquith went somewhere in the south of France.
Biarritz.
In order to meet the King. But no, so this is a break with tradition, although there's nothing constitutional about where the monarch has to be. It's just that the monarch is the person who appoints the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is the person who carries the confidence of the House of Commons. Clearly, the Conservatives have a large majority in the House of Commons. Whoever carries the confidence, whoever wins the Conservative Party leadership election carries automatically the confidence of the majority of the House of Commons due to that election victory back in 2019, and that's whom the Queen will appoint to be her Prime Minister. So yes, quite a lot of travelling for Wednesday. We'll learn the result on the Tuesday. No doubt, probably, I wouldn't be surprised if the eventual winner chooses to scuttle up to Scotland immediately after that announcement on the Tuesday, so that they, whoever she may be, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, will be able to come back down to Downing Street to try and give that first address on the steps of Downing Street in the light, because it's going to be pretty much a race against time to get to that door and be able to say something not in darkness.
Indeed, or indeed in the rain, because after a summer when it's been perfectly dry, they expect us to stand all next week when it starts to rain for the autumn. In saying that, is the final hustings tonight. I was slightly jesting earlier. Actually, was I really jesting? What are we going to hear tonight? It's in London. It's the final one. But yet again, we're probably just going to hear the same arguments over and over again.
Dare I say it that Rishi Sunak will say his mother owned a chain of chemists? Dare I say it that Liz Truss will say that she's a plain-speaking Yorkshire woman? I mean, all of these phrases that we've heard again and again in these hustings will no doubt be trotted out. But we have heard some releases from these campaigns ahead of these hustings. Rishi Sunak focusing on his ground campaign, saying that we should ignore these polls that are obviously very much against him and say that he's got a good ground game, and whoever he's met when he's gone around the country, and he has visited a huge number of Conservative constituency associations. He's been focusing on that. Meanwhile, Liz Truss has been pushing her policy agenda. No new policy, but speaking about how the specific policies she has already announced apply to London. Of course, this is the London hustings. There's been one in every region of the United Kingdom. This is the last one tonight. And Liz Truss especially focusing on some of these investment zones, these low-tax, low-regulation zones, saying that she'll create a number of them in and around London. And a really interesting point about these zones, looking back over what her campaign has said in the last month or so, is it's not just low tax and perhaps deregulation, but specifically looser planning controls in these zones that could help build houses. So a really interesting point here is if London gets sort of in central London some of these development zones, you may see different planning regulations in inner London compared to in the Tory shires. And that might be a very clever way for Liz Truss to build houses in Labour constituencies and keep the same planning restrictions we currently have in Tory constituencies.
Fascinating stuff, but we are not, very quickly, Tom, we're not really expecting an upset, are we, next week in terms of who's going to win? Is it undoubtedly Liz?
With the risk of getting egg on my face, and indeed...
or indeed eating a hat.
Or indeed eating a hat, but I'll tell you what, if I get egg on my face now, so will every single pollster in this country, so will every single pundit. I'm not sure there is a single person who credibly says that Rishi Sunak really stands a chance, unless something has gone horrifically wrong with every single member of the British Polling Council. It's Liz's for the losing.
Indeed, I'm not entirely sure that even Rishi Sunak thinks he might win. Tom, as always, thank you very much indeed, Tom Harwood. And we'll have coverage, must be said, of the final hustings in London. I'll be there throughout the evening here on GB News. Now, let's turn to Royal Mail workers, because they are on strike today with 115,000 staff walking out in a row over, you've guessed it, pay. The strikes will disrupt the delivery of packages and letters, and further strikes are planned for next month. Let's speak to our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, who is at one of the strikes in Warrington for us this afternoon. Sophie, very good afternoon to you. And yet again, here we are, another strike about pay and conditions.
Well, a very good afternoon to you. Today is the second day of 4 planned strikes for Royal Mail workers. As you can hear, they're beginning to hit a lot of support throughout the day. Now, the Royal Mail have already apologised for any inconvenience these strikes are going to be causing. They've said Royal Mail has well-developed contingency plans, but they cannot fully replace the daily efforts of its frontline workforce. We'll be doing what we can to keep services running, but customers should expect significant disruption. Now, around 115,000 workers are striking up and down the UK today. As you can see, some of them are right behind me here in Warrington. A little bit earlier, I spoke to some postal workers about why they've decided to strike. Why are you on strike today?
We're on strike today, and this ballot is just about pay, so that's all I'll talk about is pay. On another day, on another ballot, we'll talk about other things. But we're on the pay because the Royal Mail have imposed 2% on us, which is, what's that, £2 in every 100. So if you come out with £400, it's like an £8 pay rise. Electricity's gone up over £8, gas has gone up over £8, food's gone up over £8, weekly shopping. I mean, really, I don't think it's just about us, I think it's about the whole country. The RMT and all the other unions are fighting for the same thing. We're not being greedy, we're just asking for a basic pay, what we can live on.
We're on strike over pay because a lot of members are struggling, and they've offered a 2% pay rise, which they don't think is acceptable. And with the way inflation's going and things like that, it's just not acceptable.
We're on strike because 2% is not enough in this day of living, cost of living crisis, and all got families, you know what I mean? So, yeah, 2% is not enough. We're here to fight to get what we deserve.
Because there's loads of people that work really hard and they don't get the pay they deserve. I used to be a DPD worker, so I know a little bit about what it's like to parcel sort and stuff like that. I'm unemployed at the moment, but I'm willing to fight for them because I know how hard they work.
Well, so far, workers have been offered a 2% pay rise, which will be backdated to April. That's on top of a 3.5% increase in equivalent benefits if they agree to certain changes in working practices. However, staff believe they deserve a pay rise in line with inflation, especially considering their work during the pandemic.
Sophie, thank you very much. Sophie Reaper there joining us live from Warrington this afternoon. OK, that is it for the time being on the briefing here on GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, though, we're going to be talking about Shamima Begum. That spy case, was a Canadian intelligence officer involved in that. Plus, we'll be looking at the European economy possibility of it hitting recession as inflation hits a new high. All that and much more between now and 4, but first, a little after 3:30, let's bring you up to date with the news headlines, and it's back to Rosie Wright.
It's 3:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The jury in the Ryan Giggs trial has been discharged after failing to reach verdicts on any of the 3 counts he faced over the 4-week domestic violence case. The jury had been out considering its deliberations for 23 hours before being brought back into court this afternoon. The jury foreman said there's no realistic prospect of reaching verdicts, even if they were given more time. The Queen will break from royal tradition next week by not returning to London to meet Boris Johnson and the newly elected Prime Minister. Buckingham Palace says Mr Johnson will instead travel to the Balmoral estate in Aberdeenshire for his final meeting with the Queen as head of the Conservative Party. The announcement comes in the final few days of campaigning between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak for the post in number 10. Boris Johnson's warning the Kremlin is intent on undoing the good of Mikhail Gorbachev as he paid tribute to the former Soviet leader. US President Joe Biden is among a number of world leaders who's praised Mr Gorbachev's legacy following his death at the age of 91. He's widely recognised for his role in bringing an end to the Cold War. Today, Mr Johnson accused Vladimir Putin of attempting to recreate the Soviet Union.
Mikhail Gorbachev is one of those people who triggered a series of changes that perhaps he didn't anticipate. Maybe he paid his own political price for it. But when history is written, he will be, I think, one of the authors of fantastic change for the better in the world. And what I worry about today is that the current leadership in Moscow is intent on undoing the good that Mikhail Gorbachev did.
TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.16 and 1.16 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,478 and 1 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News and The Briefing. It is 22 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon. We're on TV, online, and of course on your DAB digital radio as well. Thank you very much indeed for your company. It has been 25 years ago today that Britain woke up to the news that Diana, Princess of Wales, had died following that awful car crash in Paris. Her death sparked an outpouring of grief from around the world. The Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, called her the People's Princess, adding that he and the rest of the country were utterly devastated. But ahead of the anniversary, Prince Harry said he wants the day to be filled with memories of Diana's incredible work and love for what she did, particularly when it comes to her charity work. Well, our royal reporter Cameron Walker has been looking back at the night she died and went to meet the first medic on the scene of that car crash. A warning: his reward does contain flash photography from the stars.
Stunning. Even after 25 years, to be here on the Tunnel de l'Alma and think about this tragic accident, every time I drive through the tunnel, I think about it and I feel a bit sad.
At approximately 20 past midnight on the 31st of August 1997, Princess Diana, Dodi Fayed and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones entered the black Mercedes, having left the back entrance of the Ritz Hotel. It was driven by Henry Paul, who was 3 times over the legal alcohol limit. Their car attempted to outrun paparazzi on motorbikes. Just a month before, a single photograph of the couple reportedly sold for hundreds of thousands of pounds. The Mercedes sped into the Tunnel de Alma, lost control and crashed into the 13th pillar. Off-duty doctor Frédéric Maillet came across the smoking wreckage seconds later.
In the back, 2 passengers. The man was with no reaction, no respiratory movement. Only one young lady. She was on her knees on the floor of the car, and she was almost unconscious with difficulty breathing.
After calling the emergency services, Dr. Maillet grabs the basic medical kit in his car and crawls into the wreckage next to the princess.
I sat down on the rear seat and I lifted up her head and applied the respiratory bag to help her breathe.
Despite helping the most famous women in the world, Frédéric didn't recognise Diana.
There were a lot of pictures taken. I realised that there were lots of flash inside the Mercedes. I didn't recognise her, as a only doctor in front of 4 severe victims. I had really other things to think about.
The princess was taken to Le Petit Sapatier Hospital for emergency surgery. Doctors fought for 2 hours to save her life, but she passed away.
I'm probably the last person that she heard. That was a big shock. I didn't think she would die so quickly.
A jury in the 2008 inquest found that Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed were unlawfully killed. A combination of a speeding driver under the influence of alcohol, the fact that neither of them were wearing seatbelts, and a pack of paparazzi pursuing them on motorbikes all played a part. 9 photographers were charged with manslaughter in France, but charges were later dropped. Tessie Ojo leads the Diana Award, a charity founded on Diana's belief that young people have the power to change the world. In the days following her death, crowds collectively mourned in public.
People grieved, not necessarily because they knew her or they had met her. People grieved because of her values. They grieved because of the way that her humanitarian qualities, the way that she made you feel visible, the way that she shone a spotlight on issues that were often hidden in society.
Diana's sons, Princes William and Harry, regularly support the charity that continues their mother's work. Her empathy and humanity radiates through the next generation of the royal family, helping to make the world a better place. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Incredible thing, it's 25 years ago today. Now let's move on, because Eurozone inflation has hit a record of 9.1%, with, unsurprisingly, high energy prices the main driving force. The rate was above expectations, and it is the 9th consecutive record for consumer prices rising across the continent again. Let's go live now to speak to EU journalist Jack Parrock, who is in Prague for us this afternoon. Jack, as always, thank you very much indeed. Here we are yet again, another increase in inflation, and it's all been driven by those energy prices.
Yeah, of course, Darren. And I think this is something that we're going to expect sort of upward motion for a very, very long time now. Now, this was all really driven, as you might expect, by big inflation in Europe's largest economy, in Germany, where it's hit about 8.8%, which is dragging that inflation rate up quite significantly. Having said that, in France and in Spain, actually the inflation has eased off a little bit. But the countries where it's being most affected, where we're seeing huge numbers of inflation, are countries like Lithuania, which is up over 21.1%, and Estonia well over 25%. So this is bad numbers. And also Eurostat that released those numbers are also now starting to suggest, I mean, as we pretty much already knew, that the Eurozone will enter a recession, as we expect most economies to do so, because of these hugely increasing energy prices. And it's going to only get worse, we think.
What is the Eurozone, what are individual governments thinking, Jack, about trying to tackle all of this? I suspect we're going to see interest rates go up yet again, aren't we, from the ECB? But is there an attempt to try and mitigate, because it's interesting here, isn't it? There's a big debate at the moment about what the government should be doing to try and bring down the cost of living, not least of all with energy bills. I'm sure those conversations are being had right across the continent.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The ECB at the end of July, they raised interest rates for the first time in 11 years by 0.5 percentage point to 0. Sounds a bit weird, but basically the interest rates are completely flat now. And it is expected that there could be more intervention. But with these numbers so high, the question is what can really be done? Because the European Union as an organisation actually doesn't like too much market intervention, and especially not in energy, which is a national competency for each EU country. So every country goes out and buys their own energy. Now, there has been a bit of a patchwork, some complicated issues. For instance, Spain put on a bit of a subsidy and cap into its gas prices, which has managed to keep them kind of okay in Spain, but it's meant that there's been energy leakage, which has been going. So the French on the border regions with Spain have been buying up the energy, which is cheaper over the border. We know next week, at the end of the week, energy ministers from the European Union have been called to Brussels for an emergency meeting to discuss this, to try and find some way of dealing with this. Important to say as well, Darren, might be tempted for a bit of schadenfreude in the UK seeing this. I mean, the inflation is overall double in Britain, what we're seeing in the European Union now.
And just very funny, Jack, you're in Prague for a reason, and that's because I think foreign ministers have been meeting today, haven't they, looking at visas for Russians going into the EU, and they have reached somewhat of a deal.
They have, yeah. So the foreign ministers that came to Prague, it's been a bit of a sort of fudge, as you can imagine. Often these meetings, as you well know, are, Darren. But they have come up with a sort of interesting fudge this time. The Baltic countries were wanting an all-out ban on Russian tourist visas from entering the European Union. They obviously received the most people into their countries across the border. They share borders with Russia. Now, they haven't agreed to that. They've agreed to suspend a 2007 agreement that gave preferential treatment for Russian visas. But the French and the Germans are nervous that sort of tourism from Russia provides a sort of window into Europe that will benefit the sort of messaging of the Russian population. But what they did agree is that in the document that's come out is that national governments do have the competency to decide what they do on the issuing of visas. That's actually always been the case. But the Baltic countries and Finland and Poland have said that what they see is this as a green light to stop issuing those visas, to clamp down hard and to do it together. And they're already going to have a meeting. Those 5 countries, just the 5 of them, they're going to do that on Friday. So that's going to be a big restriction on the amount of visas that are issued. They issue a lot of them. 10 million Russians currently have a visa into the European Union in their passport, so that you can expect some changes to that in the coming weeks. They say that they're going to move as quickly as they can.
Wow, quite a big figure, 10 million. Jack, as always, thank you very much for your time. Jack Parrock there joining us live from the Czech Republic. Now, this is an extraordinary story. Shamima Begum, who fled the UK to join the Islamic State group, was smuggled into Syria by an intelligence agent from Canada. That's according to files obtained by the BBC. Mrs. Begum's lawyers are challenging the removal of her UK citizenship, arguing that she was a trafficking victim. Canada and the UK government have both declined to comment. Well, joining me now is the security journalist Samuel Armstrong. Samuel, I say this is rather an extraordinary tale. Do we know why, or for whatever reason, Canadian intelligence officers would do this?
Yes, so it's important to be clear that the individual involved who was working for the Canadians wasn't Canadian himself. He was Jordanian or Syrian that was trying to get asylum into Canada and had been involved in exactly this type of smuggling. He went along to the embassy, said, I'd very much like to become a Canadian. They said, well, not quite, but if you help us out and let us know who's going into Syria to join ISIS, we'll consider it in a while. It's a classic intelligence recruitment operation tactic, and it seems to have worked very well here. A seemingly high-value asset was recruited who was busily sending along images of the passports of everyone that was joining ISIS that came through his seemingly formal ISIS smuggling route. So he was a very valuable asset for Canadian and through the Five Eyes arrangement, British intelligence as well. Why was he looking into this? Well, the answer is obvious. Everybody that was joining ISIS, especially when they were from the West, was joining a terroristic organization hell-bent on destroying us all across the West, our way of life, our freedoms. And it's no surprise that our security services would want to get a very close look at exactly the types of people that were going out there.
Do you think this in the end, though, will help Shamima Begum's case that she was trafficked or at least helped, and thus she should be allowed to come back to Britain?
I very much doubt it. Her lawyer is being usually or normally entrepreneurial today. He's excitingly saying, look, this proves that what we've been saying is she was a victim of trafficking. The truth is it was nothing of the sort. Shamima Begum herself went out to this area. She put herself up for trafficking. There was an individual embedded within this within this smuggling network that was funneling information back. Shamima Begum has got nobody at all but herself to blame for her predicament. She decided to leave a comfortable London existence to travel halfway across the world, where she stitched suicide vests together, amongst other things, for a vile jihadist organisation that was dedicated to destroying this country. The fact that our intelligence services, not even our intelligence service, an allied intelligence service, tried to get a sense of who was going through there, really has got no chance of bolstering her, what I see as frankly fruitless case against the Home Secretary. But I make no criticism of a lawyer for trying every little trick in the book to try and get her back into the country.
Indeed, that's what lawyers do, isn't it, Samuel? Thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Samuel Armstrong there joined us down the line. Now we're going to end on yet more strike action. This time it's journalists who are going on strike, not here at GB News, it must be said, but rather the staff of Reach plc. They're the people who own newspaper titles like the Daily Express, the Daily Mirror, as well as hundreds of regional titles. And they've begun a 4-day walkout as part of a nationwide strike over pay. Well, joining me now is Michelle Stanistreet. She is the Secretary General, or the General Secretary, of the National Union of Journalists. A very good afternoon to you, Michelle. I assume it's the same old story. It's all about pay and conditions.
Hi, Darren. Absolutely. Journalists across Reach, which, as you say, covers so many different regional and local newspapers, as well as its national titles, have spent the past months and weeks reporting on the impact of the cost of living crisis and spiralling inflation on many different workers across industry, but at the same time they've also been living that impact themselves. So their dispute is about the company's refusal to budge from a 3% consolidated increase, which the company issued and planned at the beginning of this year, and has refused to move from. So there's been lots of efforts to try and resolve this dispute without needing our members to go out on strike. But unfortunately, to date, that's failed. So they're on strike today, and then there's a further 3-day strike period the week after next.
And what impact does that have on the actual newspapers, in the sense that just it doesn't mean fewer pages, fewer stories, fewer exclusives, I assume?
Yeah, I think readers and viewers of those sites have been served up, fodder to fill pages, to fill web pages, so they've not had the benefit of the diverse journalism that they would have ordinarily been able to access if journalists were in work, doing their jobs and able to be reporting.
And it is interesting, isn't it? You know, journalists are, you know, on the whole, quite badly paid, particularly when you get out of the kind of big national titles and you get to different parts of the country. And this comes at a time in which we've seen local journalism and particularly really decline in recent decades.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of stagnation in pay has been accompanied in recent years with a real lack of investment in the sector by the major companies that dominate the media industry across the UK. So we've seen, you know, precious fewer resources deployed to a job that's an incredibly important one. Journalism plays such a critical role in any functioning democracy, but it's being starved of the resources necessary both for journalists as practitioners to be able to do the jobs that they're very passionate about as well as they possibly can. And we're also seeing that in terms of the investment that's being made in them, in terms of their basic pay and conditions. And this from a company that in other respects is perfectly happy to pay its chief executive and chief financial officer packages worth over £7 million this year, and dividends in excess of £4 million are being invested back into the pockets of shareholders next month. So it's a company that's happy to pay and values some of its stakeholders, but not its journalists as employees and as the people who bring the content to readers and to communities that they serve.
OK, Michelle, appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. That's Michelle Stanistreet, who is the General Secretary of the National Union of Journalists. Lots been getting in touch this afternoon. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Ian says that Liz Truss has got 6 months, he reckons. If the voters don't see drastic turnarounds in illegal migrants, law and order and inflation, then she'll join Boris on the back benches. Ella Ray says that the Conservatives have to go, hopefully not return for a long time, if at all. It's been beyond disgraceful that they've spent 8 weeks on declaration of duty with 2 candidates leading the country while there's a cost of living crisis that has steadily gotten worse. And Alex says Boris will be back in number 10 by the end of the year, they reckon. And it all comes, as we've just seen some breaking news from PA, that train drivers at 12 rail companies are going to go on strike on September 15th. So the strikes continue over that long-running dispute on pay. That's it from me today. Colin Brazier's up next, 4 to 6. I'll be back at 3 tomorrow. Have a very good afternoon. We'll leave you with the weather.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Another dry and bright day for most tomorrow with sunny spells and probably feeling, certainly by the afternoon, a little bit warmer than it does out there today. High pressure is controlling our weather currently. There are low pressure systems lurking. We are going to see a change by the weekend. But for most of us, as I said, that high pressure will continue to dominate. It's bringing a breeze in from the North Sea. It's a bit chilly on some of these North Sea coasts, and also just 1 or 2 showers drifting in on that breeze across parts of eastern England. But they're few and far between. Most places dry, staying with clear spells overnight as well. It will be a cool night once more, certainly across Scotland. Temperatures in rural areas well down into single figures. A little warmer than last night in the south. Some towns and cities staying in the teens. On to Thursday, and again, a dry and a bright day for most. A bit more cloud over northeast England especially. 1 or 2 showers are possible close by to Newcastle and Durham, but say most will stay